Phil, we've entered garbage time. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Pray tell.
So, garbage time for me is this weird period that we have now when they say like every 3 months there's going to be a look at the banned restricted lists, right? They're going to decide either the unbanned stuff or banned stuff. But then, like, inevitably, like a week or two later, a new set is going to come out. And you would think that they would just time the banned and restricted announcement on the same day as the set. And I get for like news reasons that's a little bit, like I guess like we can't stretch the news out for like 2 weeks, which is I guess bad for us. But for the last 2 weeks, we've had this meta game that's like Dragonstorm is coming out, and we have bans. So people have been playing Magic online and playing Magic at stores and stuff like that ostensibly. And there's been this uproar about, oops all spells. The top three decks at this tournament were oops all spells. The top three decks of this tournament were Nadu mid range, and we got to ban Nadu or ban oops all spells. And as relevant as some of that information is, you can't judge any of that until we get the new cards to play with to see if there's anything that shifts in the meta for that.
Yeah, so you're saying that just because the BNR is not timed cooperatively with the set release, that there's this interim time where we know that the format is going to change, presumably if there's playables in the new set, that make it so that doing anything for these 2 weeks is sort of null and void.
Yeah, it's like, so, and then that's sort of why I've been playing the Reanimator deck with like different flavors of Troll of Khazad Doom is like, almost a meme. But I just want to see like, hey, could you replace Troll of Khazad Doom with these things? Because I don't want to test Cephalid Breakfast, the deck that I'll probably like end up playing at like a main event if there's one coming up around me anytime soon, because I'm not going to get any real like true practice with it. I'm not going to get to see the cards that are going to be out for the next 3 months until another set comes out. Like that metagame information to me is worthless. As fun as it is to play Magic, we all love to play Magic. That's why we're here, right? But you don't get any real data aside from just reps in with your deck, especially if your deck is going to change, which it doesn't look like mine's going to change at all. But you're going to end up seeing new cards and stuff like that. So there's this weird 2 week period where like nothing matters when you're playing because you don't have like anyone gauging the metagame should erase all data for these last 2 weeks when the new set drops. I don't know if that's what they do or not, but honestly, like it doesn't make sense to me to be like, oh yeah, since the last ban announcement, like all this stuff has happened, because that's it's extra data that it might be relevant, but it really shouldn't be.
I guess that is also another point in talking about online meta versus paper meta, because if you have access to the cards, you can play that in paper. Like I played at the local yesterday, and you can just play the cards. Like I played Rally of the Monastery for the first time.
Okay.
There was already plenty of cards seeing play from the new set that people were trying out.
Isn't the set release like on the 11th?
Well, the set like comes out on the 11th, but pre-release happened, and if you have the
Pre-release
cards in
and you
paper,
can play with
they made that change a little while ago. That like,
oh god, yeah. Okay,
yeah,
so
you
there's
can like
still there's a full week where like bans happened and now a new set comes out. You would think that they could just line those up together. And this is a legacy player problem, I guess. But I feel like this is relevant for standard and for modern too. Like if you're worried about any sort of data, any top deck or anything like that, or like what is the potential ban or whatever, which so many eyes are on nowadays, then having that data in between that time is honestly kind of worthless. Am I wrong?
yeah, to an extent, yeah. I think you are correct that it is going to be mostly useless, and that there might be some pressures coming from cards from the new set that apply, that would alter your choices to some extent. I don't know. I think that it's going to be case by case, because I don't think that there's going to be anything from this set that's really going to overhaul something such that like Breakfast would have to respect and then changes its
Well, here's
how
the
it
issue.
plays,
Here's
or
the
like
issue, Phil.
any card choices that it makes.
Finding the right high-end cards for legacy, vintage, pre-modern, or old school Magic can be challenging. That's where our friends 3-for-1 Trading come in.
3-for-1 Trading is one of Europe's top Magic the Gathering retailers with an incredible selection of premium singles, sealed product, and even full sets, all available with free, fast, and secure worldwide shipping.
They add fresh inventory every Wednesday with weekly deals and discounts. So whether you're hunting for that elusive piece of power, a legacy staple, or something spicy for your collection, they've got you covered.
First high-end orders over $500 or 500 euros, use the code EDFREE to get free worldwide shipping.
Check them out now at the number 3, the number 4, the number 1.gg/ED. That link takes you right to the shop and helps support the channel.
Huge thanks to 3for1 Trading for supporting the Legacy community. Now back to the show.
As power is crept further, this does become more of a problem. When a set like Modern Horizons 2 comes out, or something like that, any set that actually does impact Legacy, there's going to be this weird like garbage time that they have where like you should have banned this card but you didn't, and that's what happened. Like a perfect example, right? Let me make it no clearer than the not banning of Grief right before MH3 came out, right? Like that is the best example I have of why do we have this time, because they were like, well, in a week we'll see if anything changes. It's like, don't in a week we'll see if anything changes. Make the ban or don't make the ban. You guys are already sitting on the fence about this and obviously about to fall over it. Like, just make the decision and be like, yeah, with the new set out today, we don't foresee that this will affect anything. We're going to make this ban. And that's the whole passive language thing that you were talking about as well. But it just seems weird to me that you would give this like weird little window of time after a ban, but before a new set is out for us to even engage in the format in any meaningful way. Because after a ban, tensions are so high. People get so invested in the format again. They get involved in discussion, and you're just like sitting there like everyone's eyes are on this thing. And then you're like, okay, well, for the next week, no one gets to like any of the data that you have is pretty much irrelevant because there's a new set coming in.
But I think that, like, given that Legacy and Vintage are not going to be spun off into their own BNR announcements, they're going to be tied into everything else. And the thing that they seem to care about in the last couple of announcements is not tweaking the RCQ system or season for whatever format that happens to be. So, like, we've seen that they're willing to sacrifice the quality of those seasons to just let people prep for them, even if that prep is abysmal. So, like, they did it with Nadu and Modern, where they ruined that RCQ season, even though everybody knew that Nadu was going to get banned out of the format. They just did the same thing with Underworld Breach. They're like, nope, people are getting cards and they're going to practice and they're going to prep for these events, and we're not going to mess with them, even though it is known like way ahead of time the decisions that they're going to make for those formats. Now, that is irrelevant when it comes to Legacy and Vintage, but like they're also not showing any signs that they would make a separate schedule or announcement side for Legacy and Vintage. They're just doing all the formats all at once. The only format that gets any outside treatment is Pauper, and sometimes Pauper is also just included into the same BNRs like they just did in this past one. So I don't think that like there is a solution to this, interim garbage time. I think that like we just deal with it for the couple of weeks that it exists, at least online, since in paper people can play with the cards immediately once they have them. Now, can they get them fast enough is one thing if they're not pre-releasing, but I think that like I agree that when it comes to your online data, you're going to have to like assume that it is an asterisk on those matches until the new cards come out. If there are new cards that that you're for sure going to try, and it's unfortunate that it's that way, but it just doesn't seem to be a high priority for them to fix that short interim period.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about what the meta game looks like in these last couple of days, right? Like we have data from the last 7 days, and we can sort of encapsulate that and say like the next time we have a look, we can be like, hey, did they take into account the fact that there was this this garbage time or not? So right now we have Omnitel at 9.4% of the meta. This is the last 7 days from MTG Goldfish. We have Dimir Tempo at 9% of the meta, Dompy at 7.4, Delver, Tamir Delver at 6.4, Oops All Spells at 6, Sneak and Show, notably different than Omnitel. I feel like those are the same decks. I know that there's a couple of different cards, but it's kind of ridiculous. 5.4% of the meta. Blue Painter is apparently doing quite well at 5.4% of the meta. We have Sultai Beanstalk. Nadu mid-range combo has seen a huge uptick in play. Mono Black Reanimator, Is It Delver, both have like 3.7 and 3.3. Cephalid Breakfast at 2.7, Doomsday at 2.3, Death and Tax at 2.3, and Jeskai Control at 2.0. So we have what 15% of the meta is Omnitel right now, basically, like show and tell of some kind.
So yeah, my breakdown is a little bit different. I see it's Ancient Tomb, Days Wasteland, Ancient Tomb, Days Wasteland, Oops All Spells, Ancient Tomb, and then you get Beanstalk, Nadu, and then you get Dark Ritual, Days Wasteland, Nadu, Urza Saga, Dark Ritual, and then you go into like the dregs.
Well, I think one thing we can say off the bat, though, Phil, is Reanimator not at the top of the tables. Looking at this after the bans.
Yeah, so Dimir Tempo, people just taking it's like if you don't want to play the Reanimator package, then you can move into just playing the same cards but swapping the Days Reanimated for Nethergorths. You know, the Underground Seas are still powerful even in that shell. Like the Tempo side of that deck is untouched. So
well, you're basically getting, you're freeing up. Well, you have to free up the trolls, right? So they're your Nethergoyfs, right? But then you're freeing up 2 more spaces for your fatties. They're the Kados, right? Then you're freeing up 8 spaces in your main deck with, I guess, let's say that you're not playing with the fatties, right? So the Kados are just are 2 extra cards right now. You're taking out 4 reanimates, and 2 of those are the Kados, and then 2 are Stifle, it looks like right here. So
there's
Stifle, Fatal Push, like come again.
There's going to be like, season to taste, like thoughts Stifle. Now, I think that like these numbers are also going to be, definitive choices on the side of things that like this is a predominantly Ancient Tomb heavy metagame at the moment, as we were talking about with all the show and tell decks, the stock up decks. If control is showing itself back up at all in a reasonable way, it's going to be with Beanstalk. I think if you are like me and being a control mage and aren't beanstalking, you're doing it wrong, unfortunately. Like if you guys remember like what it was right before MH3 when Bowmaster was just on the cusp of 50% of the metagame, I made a nerd card parody about how like it was cusping 50% and then Frog came in, took all the heat, and then those numbers dwindled. So if you remember that metagame where Beanstalk was playable there, or it was a Beanstalk arms race for the control decks. And I think like now that they've banned the cards from MH3 that have like propped up the speed of the format on the speed of the format for Dimir Reanimator, I think if we go back into that world, then if you're trying to do the Jeskai stuff or trying to stay a little bit leaner on straight blue-white, there's just nothing going to be more powerful than Beanstalk. So I would urge all of my fellow control mages move towards Beanstalk because that's the only thing that's going to be existent for us.
Well, I think that's where the Jeskai deck has like an edge over, say, a blue-white deck where you can play the back to basics plan and then like 4th Aerolingus and stuff like that to attack down planeswalkers. They are at least accepting the fact that like the Beanstalk control deck is probably playing a heavier mana base and not as hard against like a back to basics Blood Moon plan.
Oh yeah. I'm not trying to redirect the conversation. Just pointing out that like the Sultai Beanstalk decks have gotten enough tools to like continue pressing the advantage on that fact that Beanstalk is best, and then the Days Wasteland shell within that stuff is just going to be better than any of the tools that Jeskai has gotten. So like, don't get me wrong, if you want to play Jeskai, play Jeskai. Like I'm still playing my the thing that I enjoy. Play what you like. I'm just saying that like if you are looking to take control into an event even after the new set comes out, like if you are doing anything other than beanstalking, you're probably handicapping yourself voluntarily. Which if you want to do that, all the more power to you. I think though, looking at the Dimir Tempo list that is the second most played in the last week, if you look at like they've cut a Fatal Push, they're on one Go for the Throat as opposed to Shoot the Sheriff or
Shoot the Sheriff, yeah.
But if you look at like this list as like the stock thing that's doing well, there's 2 Stifle, 3 Thoughtseize. There are 4 total removal spells outside of Kaito, and now Kaito is like recurring removal if tapping down is something that you care about. Tapping down isn't always going to work for some things, like Bowmasters has a static effect. It doesn't matter if it's tapped down or not. But like if you're just playing against opposing Nethergorths or opposing Murktides, yeah, tapping down is pretty good. But all that is to say, the combination of Wasteland, Force of Will, Daze, Thoughtseize, like this type of deck is going to be very good against combo because the only cards that it has that are dead are those 4 removal spells. And like, so there's a lot less chafe that you could draw, and the upside of both being able to attack the hand and the mana base and be on board and have access to remove anything that you need in the form of Brazen Borrow, and you hit really fast, so you can tax their cantrips on Bowmasters. You have inevitability early with Tameo. Nethergorth hits really hard. Like it's just hitting on all axes, and your hand is also not safe, and that's a nod to it being a combo-centric format. Like, if we're in a format where like you're just playing more to the board, like if D&T's numbers were a lot higher, you'd see less Thoughtseize, right? But this is the world that we're in. So I think that the point of it being that if you don't have the consistency of being, if you want to try something different that's not the Entomb Reanimate package, you could still just play Entomb and Trax or Reanimate and otherwise keep the rest of this deck the same. You could shave your numbers a little bit here and there on a couple of cards that you're playing here, and it would just certainly be as fine. Like, you cut the Stifles, cut another Goyf or something like that, and then you just get your Reanimator package right back in. And you could even pivot into that if you wanted to.
Yeah. Hey, Legacy fans, since you're enjoying the show, please like and subscribe to the video. It helps the channel grow.
Support Eternal Turtles on Patreon so we can create even more content and cover events.
Patreons get an ad-free RSS feed, 4 bonus episodes a month, and Discord recognition. Join the Dirtle Maniacs at patreon.com/eternaldurtles.
Now back to the show.
I think so. We're talking about Dimir Tempo. Omnitel is up here obviously as the other, like, do you have it deck, versus like Red Stomp, Mono Red Stompy, and like Omnitel, Show and Tell being like relatively strong decks that can just like, whoops, I turned one, did the thing. And then you have Oops All Spells up here at the 6% mark, right along with it's basically like the meta has like at the top 5 3 different shells, right? Days Wasteland, Ancient Tomb, or Dark Ritual, right? And there's only really one Dark Ritual deck. Like, you can go down to 12th place or 13th place or whatever in the meta right now and talk about Doomsday. But really, Oops All Spells is the kind of outlier here as far as the like absolutely like this is not within the realm of what we're used to for Legacy as far as speed is concerned. At 6%, I don't know if it's threatening enough to see a ban, but we have to really gauge the misery of the local player on this too.
Yeah, also, like, if we look at the last 7 days, it's for tabletop, it's 6%. Where are we for? I mean, at what point do you think, like, I know that people wanted Uso spells to get checked in the last thing. I mean, at what percentage of the metagame are you like, all right, yeah, this is too much? I don't know. Last time we talked about it, and I was like, I remember there was an episode where I was like, yeah, you just gotta remove this deck's existence from the experience, from But they said in the BNR announcement that they were like, they think that this is cool. They think it's cool that a deck like this can exist, even though in the same BNR they were like, Mycospawn steals the Magic play experience. Now, I'm on the side of, if my opponent just kills me before I get to take a game action, that's stealing the Magic playing experience.
It's not very fun. Yeah.
But like, I'm also of the mind now that I'm like, okay, yeah, I have a different, if I were in that chair, I would make different choices. That way, what I'm saying is aligned across all of the decks as opposed to just, individual decks or individual cards to taste. Like, in my opinion, like, that the threshold shouldn't be that, like, yeah, a turn one, even if it's like Glass Cannon, should get to exist if it's consistent enough to be able to play at a high percentage. Now, like, if that's the world that we're in and we're going to just support all that, as we've seen, the banning Troll kind of just this show that, like, yep, Entomb Reanimate for insert fatty that effectively ends the game will just always exist. That's just like, no matter how powerful or dominant that might become, we are in the vintage stage of Legacy. Right?
Well, are they playing it in the Days Wasteland shell is the question. That was the question posed by the ban announcement. If they can continue to play it in a Days Wasteland shell as like part of a tempo deck, then it's a problem. I don't mind it if it's the like mono black Reanimator. Like, that's fine. Like, go ahead and be the Reanimator deck, be the all-in Reanimator deck that loses to Graveyard Hate. I think that's a totally fair plane to play on. I just think that if you're allowed to play 2 fatties in your deck and then 10 other cards to make your Reanimate plan happen, then something's got to give. Now, if that's the case and we've hit that critical mass of that plan isn't good enough anymore, you have to be one or the other, I'm fine.
I think that's where the disconnect is, when they say, like, yes, we want this sort of thing to exist, but we want the normal hate that we would see that would otherwise be able to combat those decks, be able to combat them. And I am of the opinion now that all of the threats are so good that the means to be able to pivot off of, like, being the all-in deck is so trivial to do that to me is looking at, like, a 5 year ago lens in modern day problems where you're like, oh yeah, if the deck just is built the way we want it to be, then everything is fine. But that's just not the way it is. Like if you wanted to pivot into any plan that isn't the all-in graveyard deck, you could just do that with real ease. Like you have a lot of options that are just like individual single powerhouse card advantage.
Yeah, there are cards that like
don't care about the
Barrow-goyf that
graveyard.
just build around themselves at that point. Yeah.
There's cards like Barrow-goyf. I mean, if they're playing blue-black and they just want to play Tameo, okay, nice graveyard hate. I'm just going to flip my 1-mana Planeswalker. Like, I mean, if you wanted to move into there's the Bowmaster, Dauthi Voidwalker plan that we've seen. They could just play Urza Saga if they want to and beat you down with constructs, and then have a package all of that thing. Like the avenues of which that on any of these decks could just become not graveyard decks to compel you to bring in your graveyard hate to respect the thing and then just pivot you anyway. Like, I don't think granted, like the pivot plans have always existed, but I don't know if they've ever existed with such ubiquity across so many different varieties in a way where it's like, you're not actually able to, like, I mean, if you're maybe studying enough and like, oh, they're choosing this plan versus that plan versus this plan, like this is the, the sideboard juke du jour, but like, there isn't really going to be a way to check that. It's just going to stress all of the stuff that's already being stressed. Like, I just don't agree with the notion that it's like, yeah, like these fast combo decks, you just as long as they cave to the things that we designed to have them cave to, then they're fine. But like the people that are playing those decks and trying to win with them because they're powerful are not just like, yeah, let's just voluntarily fold to the stuff that we know is coming.
Yeah, you want to break the meta. That's the whole point of any 1v1 game is to be the person who solves the thing. And we did solve the thing with putting Entomb into Reanimator.
Also,
your deck.
Any of these dark ritual decks, like at any point, could also just, if they don't want to go into like the creature side of things, like it's like, oh, everybody's going Barrow-goyf. Like, I don't know, turn one, land dark ritual, Lotus Petal into the One Ring or something. Like, if you want to dodge the graveyard, you can easily do that. For the decks where it's like, oh yeah, like let's just like null rod the whatevers, like that those haymaker pieces, there's so much. Like, remember when we were talking about the load bearing on cards? Like the load bearing on those cards is so significant that like if your opponent just is like, okay, well that's the thing that has to bear all the load, otherwise my deck buries you, so I'll just fight over that and nothing else.
Well, there was a point in time, Phil, back in the day. I hope you remember that those Reanimator decks, as their backup plan, were show and tell decks.
Yeah, but now, like, if I'm saying that, like, however you want to like line up the hate for insert deck that is too consistent and too powerful nowadays, that like the argument of they should fold to the things that are designed to hose them is just not a rational argument anymore, because the power level of things to be able to pivot around them is just too significant. This isn't complaints. This isn't. I think this is just like we got to start recalibrating the lens. Like, it's like, if these things are like, if we are not going to touch them because they should exist, like turn zero combo should just is something that we want to promote as something that is part of the format in a significant way, then we just got to recalibrate the lens on,
of course,
where does something like that, because in any of the other times, like
we have to recalibrate the commentary lens, but we also have to recalibrate how our decks are built. Like, you have to start playing 4 of a Force of Negation as well as 4 of Force of Will. You have to basically be playing main deck hate against the decks that don't allow you to play the game, and hope that because you're doing that, you're also going to have some kind of a game against a fair.
Eternal Dirtles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy, and even fan-supported formats like Pre-Modern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we were to look at any of these deck lists, like, okay, you have the Daze Wasteland shells with the souped-up 1-power creatures, whether that's Nethergorf, Tameo, or Dragon Rage Channeler, like taking the brunt of things, and then Murktide on both ends, like being the top end thing to like chunk you out for half your life total. It's like, okay, otherwise the decks are indistinguishable from each other, right? It's like, are you on Dragon Rage Channeler or are you on Nethergorf? But otherwise the rest of the deck is the same. Instead of Thoughtseize, you might be on Pierce or whatever it is that they're choosing instead. But like, okay, instead of Kaito, you're playing Bolt and Questing Druid as your, instead of like, I want to draw cards, you're like, I just want to end the game. okay, like it's all well and good. Are they significantly different flavors? I mean, maybe, I guess so. Like the difference between knowing that you can get Thoughtseize versus you can't is, pretty significant. Otherwise, the rest of I mean, if you look at where we are, like Beanstalk Control is Days Wasteland. So like the notion of anything that you get that isn't
Control.
like, well, like if we're categorizing Temur Delver and Dimir Tempo as tempo decks, but then Beanstalk Control as a control deck just because it doesn't have the one drop, it's still playing Tameo. It still has Days Wasteland in it. Like that crossover is pretty flush. And
yeah, basically what tempo means now is this deck isn't supposed to have a late game. Is that what it is?
What I'm saying is that like the first deck that you get that isn't Days Wasteland or combo in some capacity anywhere on this list is down in the 2% range at Death and Taxes.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay,
right.
Like this is a deck that is trying to cross the finish line by attacking that isn't Days Wastelanding you out of the game as like that foundational pillar of the metagame. So before, like you are Ancient Tomb, Days Wasteland, Oops All Spells, or you're like some version of Breakfast, which is an Urza Saga combo deck that also can punch on turn 1, turn 2, that sometimes plays Days. And it's like,
well, not the mid-range combo deck. That's a whole different thing.
I'm just saying that like,
actual Breakfast, yeah.
I'm saying that like the world that we're in now, like I think that it is reasonable to, this is the poll, right? For the takeaway from this episode, here's the poll. Given that they have the last several bans, they for a long time, they've banned Protecting Ancient Tomb. And for a long time, they've banned Protecting Days Wasteland, right? Like there's a lot of stuff on the ban list that is for those sins. Troll of Khazad-dûm is really the significant thing also where they're like, Entomb Reanimate is in the Ancient Tomb Days Wasteland aggregate of format pillars that are never going to get touched, right?
It must be protected, yeah.
Now, the thing about all of those things is all of those strategies really lock you out from being able to play like reasonable, quote unquote, fair Magic. You know what I mean? Like Ancient Tomb is not trying to do anything that isn't trying to end the game fast. Days Wasteland is going to compress your what is reasonable to be played at all. Dark Ritual and all of those decks, obviously, also not trying to do anything that's not trying to get you dead as fast as possible. Like, I think that this past ban announcement, and maybe we're late to the game on this, but like Legacy is just now past the Rubicon, right? Like we are in the vintage territory of, yeah, your interactive like fair decks. If you want to play that stuff, you are just knowingly going in with a 40% deck, and hopefully you have a good time. But like you know that those are not viable things to do. Like if you were to take like, granted, like the bug decks in vintage that don't play, like the powerless bug decks that play like 4 Collector Oof and Deathrite Shaman and Leovold, like essentially like the decks that are budget otherwise that are trying to hate out the vintage metagame. Those decks can do have success sometimes, right? Like there was a pilot that went like 7-0 at Eternal Weekend. I forget if he top aided, but like I remember there was like a bug pilot that
I played an off meta like Temur deck that and pulled a decent amount of wins.
So now that like that deck being whatever percentage of the field it is, everybody who's sleeving that kind of deck up and going into a vintage event knows that they're going in as an incredible handicapped underdog. Right, like that's not.
Or they think they've solved something. They have something to prove. It's one or the other. You know that you have a handicap, or you're exploiting something.
You know that you're going in already playing from behind. Like you know that you are underpowered by comparison to everything that you're going to sit across from. Right, because the difference between you having power in your deck and not is a significant difference, right? Like, yes, you could theoretically turn to your Collector Oof and cheese somebody, but that's what you're doing. You're trying to cheese what is hopefully like a fair enough share of the metagame that wins you games on the spot, right? Like you are trying to cheese the fact that you're trying to compensate your handicap by cheesing in some way. I think that like for the last couple of years, this is just what the legacy metagame has looked like. And if we are going, and if they're saying that Oops All Spells is something that they think is cool and want to have in the format, and they're protecting all of these pillars that are otherwise, untouchable and everything else needs to go, then I think Legacy is also now in the space where instead of Mishra's Workshop and Bazaar, we just have Ancient Tomb, Days Wasteland, like, and Tomb Reanimate. Like these are the things. And if you are doing any of that stuff, that means that if you are trying to be the deck that crosses the finish line in a fair way or stops that stuff, that those things are wide and require a plethora of different tools. And a lot of the tools that you would otherwise use are just better used in the shelves that are trying to beat you with that other stuff. So I think that like we are just like, it's tough to tell, like, because we have lived through all of this time. But like, I don't think that right now there is a reasonable way that you could argue that Legacy is just not in that vintage space of either you're doing something objectively stupidly busted, but like if you're trying to do anything fair Magic, you are just you're
this is
behind.
This is what like I think Eternal Glory, like months ago, they said this whole thing where like the hyperbaric gravity chamber, like we learned over the last couple of months to fight on Mars, right? Like to fight in the high gravity area to just exist in Legacy. And then when they banned the thing that we were kind of fighting, everybody, it turned out everybody's now like superhero level strong, playing like on Super Saiyan mode still, because we had to adapt to get to the point where we could even defend against those decks. But now the decks that are left are now becoming the problem.
Well, I'm now saying that
the Rubicon has been crossed, as you would say.
Yeah, which means that like saying that our the way that we talk about this stuff, like before when we were talking about, oh yeah, like Michael Spawn's the easiest thing to get rid of, like something's got to get checked out of the Reanimator deck. Like now that we're here and these are the things, like this is partially from the announcement where they're like, yes, we think it's cool that something like Oops can exist. If that's just where we're at, then I don't think that we can talk about like, oh yeah, this thing is too powerful and something needs to get checked out of it now. Like I just like it seems to me that like looking at where we are as like one of the things that they wanted to do, they were like, we really want mid-range and control to be able to come back in a meaningful way. And a lot of the players that we had on our cast for that video also said so. And then they got rid of Microspawn as a means to like try and help that out a little bit. But then in the same breath are like, but we think it's cool that Oops can exist in a meaningful percentage. So it's like, these things are just at odds to me. And I think that like, if we want to prop that sort of thing up, then like it's only, I guess, overwhelming sentiment that can change it. But otherwise, it's something that is too powerful. It's like, you can't be more powerful than consistent turn 0 kills, right? Like, and this is Oops is just the example because it was something that they had mentioned as something that they're cool thinking is cool existing. So it's like, if they want to prop up mid-range and control, well, all of the things that are being supported as the pillars of the format, just really don't let that sort of thing happen. And if they do, you sort of just have to assume those pillars anyway, which then kind of compel you to move away from the mid-range and control macro types. Because if you were to move towards Days Wasteland, it just compels you to be like, okay, well then I'll like be the leaner version that gets me closer to the tempo package because that's what those cards enable anyway. Or if you're like, okay, well, I want to play the fair mid-range thing, but now the best tool that we're getting is like stock up, but stock up's just best in Ancient Tomb. So I guess I just got to move into Ancient Tomb, in which case you're incentivized to do all of the things that Ancient Tomb incentivizes you to do. So it's like, there's all of these other things where it's like, you could put them in the mid-range or control macro types, but to do so is just to make yourself worse than doing the thing that those cards are better at doing to begin with. And if those cards are the things that they're like, yep, these are the untouchable pillars of the format that we are going to make sure are always good and always playable no matter what. And design is also pushing those things to be more powerful, whether that's via commander product or just, inherent power creep, which is going to push Days Wasteland. Then we're just in a space where mid-range and control can only really look like mistakes like Beanstalk, which are just Days Wasteland plus Beanstalk, right?
Yeah.
That's just the world that we're in. And I don't mean to be redundant, but I think that like this is sort of like, I think like our checkmark episode or our checkpoint episode of like going forward, there isn't we need to make sure that control and mid-range can be back in. This was this past BNR was like, we want to make sure that control and mid-range can come back in. And then they were still tentative on their, like too tentative, and voiced the fact that they're like, no, we want turn 0 kills to exist. So I think that like in the powerless void that we are, I think that that's like, we are like, Legacy is now just diet vintage in a way where it's like mid-range and control just is not an existent thing. Like the closest thing you're going to get is somebody slamming a Kaito off of, behind Bowmaster Days,
Well, what do you think? Have we crossed the Rubicon? Comment below and subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet, and like and all that stuff, and we will catch you on the flip.
Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to this channel and do your part to help sustain the Legacy content ecosystem. Just subscribing to this channel goes a long way to reminding YouTube that people love and support this format. Now, if you really want to go the extra mile, you should think about supporting us through Patreon. Both the links for subscription and Patreon are right here. And if you're listening on an audio format, you can go to patreon.com/eternaldurdles. Thanks so much for watching.